sounds terribly academic, and I'm not at all, although Alex is. Alex's background is in art. For those of you that don't know, Alex Fox is a makeup artist, but not like most other makeup artists, incredibly creative, and she's got a real interest in and affinity with technology as well. Makeup artistry tends to be using sort of paints and materials to create something on a face. Alex's work goes beyond that. I'm a journalist, beauty journalist. We've known one another for probably at least 10 years now, probably longer. So we know one another's work. I don't know much about the kind of things that Alex is talking about because I'm much more of a literate person and I'm a bit old school. But I'm very conscious that technology in the world of beauty is something that most businesses see as a big commercial opportunity. So there's been a real growth in things like sort of gadgets, stuff that you plug in to sort of help you in your everyday beautifying. And then there are companies like L'Oreal who have found a way of mimicking the colour of a butterfly's wing and using it for eyeshadow technology. So there are things that happen on those levels. But I think what Alex is going to discuss, and I'm going to sort of chip in and try and get her to explain bits that I don't understand, although you probably will, is this sort of connection between emotion and technology and beauty, because we don't see it as being about sort of plugs and wires and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, can you all hear me very well? I mean, I've been asked to create a piece that's going to be in the Futures 10 exhibition later, and it was about, my word was seamless, and it was kind of a reaction, what was I going to make as this piece in the framework of it being wearable features. And for me, the connection to wearables is the idea, and always the overarching kind of theme of everything that I'm involved with, which is emotion and how to make it tangible, how to represent it, how to kind of harness it, how to be able to illustrate it and evoke it. And the idea of the wearable for me, or the idea of wearable features, is that it will be seamless, it will be internal, it's not about sticking tech to the body, I don't find that. I think that the future of tech is already here. It's a flower, it's water, it's something much more emotional and spiritual and intangible. And I think that what I'm trying to illustrate and talk about today is the idea that the wearable and the technology of the future is already here. It's already the organic. It's the structure. It's the idea of the in the matrix, and the fact that you won't necessarily be attaching something to you to make you better. You already are it, and that it's more about having a catalyst to bring forth the advancement of the technology that you're wearing.
So it's seeing the potential and maximise. So in the sense that, I don't know, an athlete with, say, performance-enhancing drugs, they have the ability to go a certain distance, and a performance-enhancing drug will allow them to develop their body to go that much further. So are you talking about ingestibles, or are you talking about an emotional reaction to something that we see, and then that is technology in a sense? It's allowing you to do or be something else?
Yeah. I think that for me, it's like it's the idea that you would be able to absorb the soul of your environment, or the idea that to be able to have an advancement of the self, whether it be the desire to be faster, bigger, healthier, stronger, that you, like a performance-enhancing drug, it's more that you connect with a bit like homeopathy, where you take a sort of millionth of a flower, that with that you could actually, the wearable, the idea of the catalyst is actually that you can not only absorb the spirit of the plant, but you could have the sort of DNA history of it. So if it was grown in Denmark and it was by the sea, and you would be able to absorb the sort of the empathy of that environment, that you would be able to have an empathetic exchange that the empathy exchange would almost build onto your existing DNA, and that it would always discard what it doesn't need, and that the molecular kind of structure or matrix within inside you that would build would be through this empathetic exchange with your environment. So you would kind of absorb the essence and the matter of what it is that you are in contact with, or what it is that you're kind of exposing yourself to.
So I can see that has a parallel with eating food and turning it into energy, which then fuels your body. In terms of beauty and the notions of beauty that we understand now that are quite often sort of tied down by the idea of cosmetics, things that you put on your face or other parts of your body or your hair to make a visual change. Is there something that's coming up in the future related to cosmetics that will rely more on technology, or do you think that also already exists and it's just a question of understanding how something works? For example, I'm thinking about, say, a face cream that you put on your skin that has certain ingredients in it that affect cell communication, and this idea of anti-aging, being able to stop things from happening. And do you think that in terms of, say, makeup, colour cosmetics, there's something that could have that, the technology that's in a product that goes on your skin that has a physical effect? Do you think that that's something that's we're already seeing?
I think that the interest for me comes from the idea that you know, when you actually do put on makeup, you're creating something. You're already setting up an emotional exchange with your environment by presenting yourself in a certain way through conditioning, through habitual makeup motifs that you've absorbed your entire life. You've constructed a way of presenting, and what you're doing is already creating an environment which is reflecting back to you how you present yourself. What's interesting is the thing that you're using on yourself. I mean, makeup is, we've got to the point now where everything, obviously you're not going to react to it, it's all made from minerals, it all has an energy, it all has a vibration, it all has the colour, from the colour to the actual ingredients, they all have their own life force. But you're using it as an adornment, as a matter. What is really interesting is the property of those things. You digest it, you digest all these ingredients, so over time they become part of who you are anyway. On a molecular level, if you can absorb, if they have their own emotional intelligence, so it would be incredible, this cocktail of what you're actually absorbing to become part of who you are, because it is part of who you are, because you conduct and act a certain way when you're in makeup and when you're out of makeup. So environmentally, you're already setting up a series of events and a mirroring exchange to your environment, because you're presenting yourself in a certain way, so you're getting energy back. Therefore, how you present yourself completely immediately affects how you respond, which will affect your endocrine system, it affects your emotional makeup.
This is about lipstick makes you happy. But I mean, fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. If it's a material that you're putting on your skin that changes the way that you look, that changes the way you feel, changes possibly the way other people see you, then that in itself is already a technology.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's very, and like I was saying earlier about nothing exists, nothing can be created or destroyed. It's about just shifting the understanding of what is already existing. So everything that you need is already here.
You were discussing earlier about materials like graphene that are in the earth, are being mined now, incredibly high value because they're very sort of light, fine material that's used in computer processors, and how that material was already there, and it wasn't. It's only now that we've realised its purpose and are harnessing its purpose. Alex and I were discussing earlier that actually everything that you might ever need is present on the planet. It's simply a question of identifying the need, identifying the material that you might use, or a combination of materials, and then what you do with them. And it's the difference between where we are in terms of technology today and where we were 200 years ago. all of those materials are the same materials. It's just about how you glue them together. What a scientist will put together in terms of playing with the existing molecular structures of things that are around there to create new ones.
I think it's also, you know, the notion of what beauty is as well, and the notion of how you decide something's beautiful and what that is. And you know, I'm very interested in the promise and the sort of the promise, basically, the thought and the act, and the thing that happens in between, and how you know, to how you believe or become what you adorn yourself with, or how that kind of how something that is a matter or a material can kind of almost be, I mean, almost invisibly applied. It's hardly anything, but it's such a kind of, it's such a fall of, it's almost like you know, you reduce into such an innocent state of sort of kind of almost like naive. You know something isn't going to change the way you look, but you know you have a moment where you this belief in this material, and actually it's like you know, like you're saying about a material having no value until the paradigm changes, or the you know, you move on 200 years and it becomes rare. You know, everything's contextual. So really, it needs to be made. It need not be made of anything. It's just a belief system. You know, and I think that's what I'm really interested in, is the emotional belief of matter, and how you could shift that, or how you could actually look at the structure of what that is, and also build on top of not just the belief, but what it is actually molecularly doing to you, and how that could somehow be the digestible of it, also enhance your DNA, you know, or how you could build on top of you. I mean, the sort of illustration that I've got in the Future 10 is that idea of this empathetic exchange between nature and you, and this kind of soul structure of a plant, and that the idea that you could have this empathetic exchange with a plant where, like homeopathy or homeopathy, it's this idea that you could not only feel the mass and the structure of that plant, but you could have its kind of DNA history as well. So you could absorb the notion of what it is to be a plant in Denmark. You know, so you would have this kind of historical exchange, an empathy exchange, a structural exchange. Everything would become absorbed, and that would somehow enhance and become an enhancement of yourself. And I think that for me is as close to the idea of makeup being this kind of ethereal, emotional exchange. And I was saying earlier as well about how beauty is a very intangible, mobius, very, very, it's a very difficult area to sort of be able to deconstruct, because I think that the idea of, say, something like a flower is the most functional machine that's ever existed. You know, you always think of things being like a perfect machine, being something that is, it's got this kind of aesthetic of technology and this kind of history and notion of what something should look like if it's a technological advancement. But the idea of the flower being something that is absolutely purely functional, it doesn't know it's beautiful. The flower doesn't know it's beautiful. It just exists and has evolved from pure function to be pollinated, to grow, to exist. Whereas we think it's the most, we've bestowed beauty upon it, but it's actually the most perfect computer.
But you could also say that the human being is the ultimate machine, and yet we do have intelligence, we do have emotional intelligence. So not only are we making basic functional judgments, we're also making value judgments about things. So the difference between something that's beautiful and not perceived to be beautiful, and then you have to add in all of the cultural influences, and society that you're brought in, that makes distinctions between one person's standard of beauty and another person's. I'm trying to sort of bring this round to the fact that I think the technology that we're probably talking about is invisible and it isn't relying on something that needs charging up overnight and necessarily needs sort of teams of scientists sort of making something that's an object that then gets applied or gets worn. Do you think that we're already doing it, we're already living it, or are you, through your work, seeing things that are, I mean, not necessarily products, but techniques or the attitudes that you've been talking about coming through that point away to the future, that, you know, how are things going to be different in 100 years' time in terms of this sort of adornment that affects your emotions that you've been talking about?
Well, I think the sort of, obviously the new luxury is time, because nobody has any. But they desire fast and they desire slow. And I think that what's interesting is the fact that I think going back 50 years, people, or 100 years, everybody had a sort of idea or a notion of the future being this kind of Pierre Cardani, space bubble suits, you know, flying jets. You know, of course, everybody's still riding, you know, especially riding on Brompton saddles and bells and knitting their own hats, but equally they're wearing very niche, high technology areas that people are happy to technology to advance in. So nobody wants, and this is what's interesting and arguable about fashion technology and wearables, is that if that is your set, if that is your area, and you're up to speed on it, it's almost, it's been demystified, so you're much more ready to accept it. I think if you took some of the things that are downstairs onto the high street, people they'd reject it because essentially they feel it's not for them. And I think that's the area, like with cosmetic, which is the promise that you buy into, where it demystifies that you're, I think, so, I mean, because makeup is just, it's dormant until you activate it by putting it on. So it's ever whatever you want it to be. It's just material. So the arc, the moment that it becomes something is putting it on. So that kind of kinetic force is that's magical. You know, that's absolutely, you know, it's always different. It's all, you know, what is that? What is that? You know, and that's the wearable, I think, because there's this idea of this, and I'm rambling on now, and I kind of forgot what you said. But the sort of, I'm trying to get back to what I was talking about. But yeah, this idea of the sort of the technology aspect and the idea of actually, I've completely lost.
Do you think technology is you? Do you think you're talking about this magic moment?
Yeah.
Is it the person?
I guess I'm looking for the soul of the machine. Yeah. I'm looking for the soul of the machine. The idea of the sort of the spirit being the, you know, the kinetic spark, what is that emotion, how do you get to that, what is that, what's the magic bit, you know. I've had arguments with creationists and non-creationists and the idea of science versus God and all those kind of, who agrees that you know, the sort of bit that you can't explain, is that God or is that science? And, you know, I think it's the same thing. You know, it's the belief, the promise. I think that this is where, you know, where we started with the makeup debate, is that, you know, I started out as an artist and I ended up doing makeup. And I still feel like I'm going to get myself makeup passport rebuked because I'm such a tourist in it, and I was never meant to be there. But I've somehow ended up in fashion, and I still feel like I'm sort of being able to orbit it, because I'm sort of seeing it as I guess a series of beliefs and systems and promises that I'm trying to almost unravel and get to sort of how you could have, you know, what is it, not necessarily how you put it on and whether you wear it and what it is. It's the bit that you what it actually is, you know, the promise, the belief.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm thinking about packaging and how things are packaged up, and how, what you're saying about when you take things out onto the high street and show people things that they've never seen before, their instinct is to recoil. People don't like the unfamiliar. I wonder how much you can get away with by presenting things in a familiar package, like how extreme you can go, how weird and how different you can go.
Well, I think there's one thing I was saying earlier in the interview about the human face, is that, you know, you completely trust the human face because it's the first thing you see. you grow with it. You know, you look at your mom or your dad, or you know, you, as a baby, it's the first thing that, and you utterly believe it. You utterly believe it. You know when there's a tiny thing wrong. You know, someone's had too much surgery. It's like the whole notion of CGI. Call it the uncanny valley. It's the idea that if something is too perfect, you reject it.
What's uncanny valley?
The uncanny valley is it's basically when something's too perfect. It's when something is like when the first wave of CGIs, and also like the 3D games that I think I'm not sure which company made it, but they made these 3D games for 3D TVs and 3D glasses, and thought everybody would, but it's actually made people ill, it's given them headaches, it's, you know, and also they don't accept it because your body's saying this isn't natural, but the natural is not perfect.
It's flawed. Yeah,
flawed.
Of course, yes.
So, or not even flawed, just
yeah.
asymmetrical.
Yes.
It has its own system, and I think that to me again is a very interesting area, because you've got this kind of, you know, the uncanny valley is where I'm kind of sitting.
Mm.
You know what I mean? That to me is the closest thing on the high, to be able to explain to somebody on the high street that rejects, like you said, the new.
The different, yeah.
What's interesting about the face is
yeah.
that if you put makeup on a face and they don't accept it, it's because it's made what's so inherently familiar to them unfamiliar and frightening. So to actually the emotional state that I'm talking about, it's probably quite interesting and easier area to connect to people with, because it's more intangible and more felt.
It sounds as though what we've come around to is that actually it's the human being, it's the person that is the technology,
yeah.
rather than the external thing,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
relies on whether it's you switching something
Yeah.
on or charging it up or plugging it in, or
yeah.
The human is the catalyst for whatever happens next,
Yeah.
whether that's creating an object that's external or changing their appearance. Maybe that's what it is. I think we've yeah. Does anybody want to ask any questions? Sorry that this is all a world that Alex and I have talked about a lot, and it all sounds a bit sort of rambly and ethereal and out there. And I guess it's because we don't,
not out there,
or not out there. Actually, it exists and it's all real and it's all normal and it's all familiar. It's just a different way of thinking about things. But did anybody want to ask any questions of Alex? Don't have to if you don't want to.
Do you think there would be a time when the line is blurred between the person and the machine, like you guys were talking about, and when we no longer are in control of something that is really catalyst? I think that line will get something blurred where it's automatically done for us.
So somebody else takes charge of that.
Yeah, something almost artificial.
Yeah.
Or was that not very good?
No,
not at all.
it's the same thing. I think that, I'm kind of quite, when I was trying to make this artwork, essentially it's like LSD really. You know, it's kind of like the idea that you open, you take something and you open up to something and it's already there. Not that I'm taking it on serious, but it's a reception, or a receptive form of it's already there. You know, I think am I answering this right? But it's the idea that you're